Welcome everyone in the Senior Style Guide community. I'm so excited to be back with education after the Push conference. We're all kind of energized and ready to go. And I have had this appointment on the books for a while, and I am super excited to be talking to Josh Hanna today. If you're not familiar with Josh, we're going to tell you how to go follow him and learn all things Josh, okay? Because you're going to want to watch this. He's got a lot to share, and he's just a very intriguing creative out there in the industry. And you may have seen some of his work featured on our Instagram, and we hope to see more of Josh around the Senior Style Guide community. Welcome, Josh. Can you hear me, Josh?
Just cut out for a minute. Now you're back.
Okay, great. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to talking to you.
Me too. I was telling everybody at Push, hey, I'm going to be talking to him when I get home. So you were an integral part of Nikki Hufford's presentation at the Push conference.
Well, good. Nikki's good people, and she does amazing work. So I'm very happy to be associated with her in any way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just for everybody out there, give us a little background. Like, when did you start? What did you start photographing? And we'll kind of just grow organically today from there.
Okay. So as with a lot of people, it was a hobby more than anything. Starting out, I always go back to my, thinking back through history. There's kind of like this. You look back at moments where you're like, okay, where were important decisions made, right? And so I remember senior in high school. Christmas was coming around. My mom and dad asked me, do you want a new camera for Christmas? Because they knew I had interest in photography. Or do you want an electric guitar? Because they knew I had been playing guitar for a while. So I picked the guitar. And so I look back as one of those things of, I'm not a musician. So maybe I made the wrong decision back then. But anyways, so photography came out a few years after school, back in film. So it was very expensive. Like the learning curve was so steep because it was very expensive to buy the film and produce the film. And, there wasn't that instant feedback of like, here's a screen, I get to see how things are going. So it was like spending a lot of money to be like, here's one okay picture, so it was a real blow to self-esteem back then. But digital came out, I wasted way too much money on that first like Kodak digital camera I had that was horrible and very expensive, but then started taking pictures of like flowers and trees and landscapes, and loved getting that instant gratification of being able to see what was happening. Always swore I would never photograph people. No lie, wanted nothing to do with it. Was never much of a people person. And then actually we were at a revival church, and during that revival, I was like, you know what? I think I need to photograph people. So we actually got some donations, and I bought some muslin backgrounds, had no idea what I was doing. I bought some of those cool flow continuous lights, had no idea about lighting, and we started doing free family portraits. So anybody that wanted to come in, like every month we were doing free family pictures. They were horrible because again, had no idea what I was doing. But what I did learn through that process is I actually really like photographing people. Never thought that I would. I was very against doing that to start with, but I felt like it was something I should do. And then learned, like, again, another one of those decision moments where it's like, maybe God knows what he's talking about, because I made a career out of this point, and it's been good. And so, yeah, that's kind of where the photography thing started into people. And at this whole time, I worked almost 16 years for a bank at a job that I actually just loathed, hated every day of. So started the business part-time. Around 2007 is when I first started to get into senior pictures and deciding, like, I really like working with seniors. This is cool. And 2010 is when I got really serious about it. And then 2012 was when I left the bank full time to do this. So a lot of progression that I've talked to others who have had similar stories, I guess you could say.
You know, I love your story. And my first question from that, do you still have the guitar?
Oh yeah, yeah. I
So are you
rarely ever
playing?
play it. No, I barely pick it up, but I have it.
I asked because I have a son who came to me at age 7 and said he wanted to spend all the money he'd saved on a guitar. And
Yeah,
it was to impress a girl. And I was like, no. And that guitar, he got it anyways. He was determined, and it turned into a musical
right.
outlet for him. And, he was
Yeah,
playing in high school bands at the age of 9. So I love that it came down to a guitar and a camera, and you picked the guitar.
yeah. Well, it's one of those things you look back and go, how would life have been different had I picked the camera? But we can't do anything about the past. We can just keep going with the future. But it is something I ponder every now and then.
Well, you had to pick the guitar because it brought you to
Yeah,
the camera.
yeah, indirectly.
Yeah. Um, do you miss film?
Do I miss what, the guitar?
No, do you miss shooting film?
Oh, film. I keep telling myself I've still got an old film camera. I'm like, I need to buy some film and break that out and just see, like, after years of working digital and working with lighting, like, could I actually make something, with film that turns out? And I think I've just been too afraid to pull that trigger because, I mean, how bad would you feel? You go develop another roll and it's just as bad as it was back in, 1996 or whatever.
I promise you it won't be. I have a film camera and I break it out about once every year. And the funny thing, you had to pry the film camera out of my hands. Like you were going to be prying it out of my dead hands to get me to go to digital. And now, because we're so used to that, like you said, the instant gratification.
Yeah.
When I go out and shoot a roll of film, I immediately, like the first thing, I dial it in and I click and I pull it back. There's nothing there.
The muscle memory is built
It
to do this.
is. Even though I know it's dialed in, I still, and every time it's like, wow, it's not there.
Yeah.
So
I think it would force me to break out a light meter, which I've always been dead set against. So
well, you never know what could happen.
I
But
know.
it's fun to see how far you've come from where you started to where you are now. Kind of like in the group, you posted your beginning photos and where you are now.
Yeah.
I mean, growth is a beautiful thing to reflect on.
Right. Right.
Especially
Yeah, it's still in the back of my mind as something I want to do. I'm just going to have to make the time and sit down and do it.
well, that's awesome. So you've been photographing seniors since 2009, you said, or 12?
2007 is when I really started into them. 2010, I got more serious about trying to narrow down. Of course, it's hard when you start out, like we photograph everything because we feel like we can't turn anything down. So 2010 is when I tried to be somewhat more conscientious. Like I wanted to attract more seniors, but I was still like, if somebody asked for a wedding, I was doing that, or family pictures, I was doing that. So that was 2010-ish. 2012 is when I left to go full time. And that's where you really feel like you can't turn anything down, because now it's like, I've got to provide all of that income that I just lost by leaving this job. And that is, had that conversation with a lot of people, because I get it. Like, it's very hard to say, I need to specialize and do this one thing, because you feel like now you're just rejecting all this other potential earnings. But what we got to realize, one thing you learn is the earning potential is greater the more that you specialize. So yeah, that's kind of timeline. It probably really wasn't until, oh gosh, I'm trying to think back now, probably 2015, 2016, where I was like, okay, it's going to be seniors, and that's it. That's going to be the focus. And then it wasn't until, what is this, 2021, 2018 is when I said senior guys. All of my focus is just going to be on senior guys. So yeah, it's been a progression and a learning curve still to this day.
Well, it's been amazing. When you go to your website, you're always blown away. And how did you go from focusing on seniors, which you're correct, when you focus on just one thing or two things, all your loyalty goes there instead of going to 5 to 10 different areas. You're going right in, you're zeroing in. How did you make the leap from seniors, which you still continue to photograph, to sports templates and all that you're doing today? What
Well,
brought
that was interesting, because I never intended that. I got into doing team sports in my area, and I always said, okay, if I'm going to do, I always loved composites. First of all, I gotta get that out. I love doing like senior composites and things like that. And so when I started doing them in my area, like the team composites were, I mean, there were very, very few people nationally doing that, you know. So I was like, I want to get into that in my area, because nobody around here was doing anything remotely. It was still on the field, bad lighting, bad posing, you know, very old school, but not good.
herding them like cats through the line?
Right. And so I was like, you know, I want to do this, but I want to try and do it like this composite style, you know, actually use, well, I started on a gray screen before I got into green screen. And so I did, you know, like my first year of teams, where I was building my own backgrounds, of course, because there weren't a lot of options to get them. And I didn't really, just for myself, like I get super anal. Like if I make a piece of artwork for myself, I'm like, I feel like I've got to make every part of it. And then that's another learning thing, where you learn sometimes you just need to get help from somebody else to make your workflow more efficient and things. But that's where it started. It was like, I've got to do all this myself, make my own backgrounds. And so I was doing that. And of course I was publishing on my business page, things like that. So I show up at Sync. This is probably 2015 or 2016 or something like that. And I had never met Ty Fisher in person yet.
Isn't he amazing?
Dude is awesome. And I was following his senior work before, you know, Book You or anything like that ever started. I had followed his senior work for years. And so I went and introduced myself, because he was just starting Rebook You and he had a booth down there. And I was like, hey, Ty, you know, introduced myself. He's like, hey, yeah, like he knew who I was. And he was like, Wes has been trying to get a hold of you. And I'm like, I don't know who Wes is. And he's like, Wes Kroinger. He's like, come here, let me introduce you. So we go around a corner, and they have a new booth for this business called Next Gen. And so I get to talking to Wes, and he's like, we've been seeing on, you know, your work on your page, and like your backgrounds that you're doing are really cool. And we've got this business where we want to help photographers kind of like put their work onto backgrounds and give them the finished files, and like this really cool process. And so as we were talking, like it just started to develop, like, hey, would you want to help us with this? At the same time, you could sell them yourself, because that's not a conflict with us. And I'm like, hey, maybe this is another avenue, you know, to make a little bit of side money. That was like, that was the seed that sprouted everything from that. You know, and what I like to tell people is never underestimate the importance of going to conferences and networking with people, because had I not done that, one of the biggest parts of my business would never have developed.
Well, and Ty knows everyone. He does not know a stranger. He's just an incredible person, and he's so knowledgeable.
Right. Yeah. So it was very much just, you know, it wasn't chance per se, but it's putting yourself out into a position where you have the opportunity to make these connections, and the way things develop from that are just amazing sometimes.
Yeah, I always say you have to be willing to be lucky.
Yeah.
Well, that's really awesome, because fast forward 2015 to today, what does that look like for your business?
It's the largest part of my business right now. Now, one thing I did learn years ago is that even though we want to specialize in work, so in other words, I specialize in senior photography on my photography side of my business and stuff like that, it's still also very smart to have multiple sources of income. And the way that I heard it described, which made a lot of sense to me, I don't even remember who taught me this. I just remember I was at either Imaging or Sync or some other conference, could be a state affiliate or something. And somebody had said, if you think of it like you have 7 water faucets on, and at any given time, 3 of those faucets are running, and maybe those faucets are a big commercial client, and one is your senior work, and one is like some other, portion of your business. Well, either with or without our control, one of those faucets could get shut off. Maybe your big commercial client decides we want to go another direction. That faucet just got shut off. Well, if you've got 3 spare faucets that you could turn on, you can make up that flow. And like, just visually, it just started clicking with me. Like, that makes sense to have multiple avenues of income that you can kind of ramp up and down. And it really made sense for me as a photographer, because we're really used to winter, right? Where like tap turns off and turns way down in winter because you're not shooting as much, or especially if you're like me in strict location, people really don't want to shoot in 20-degree weather, nor do I want to. And so that was kind of putting all that together, was like, okay, if I can create multiple avenues of income here, then that helps me, one, equalize my income throughout the year, and just gives me, more importantly, sometimes, is creative outlet, because I get really bored doing the same thing over and over and over again. And so it gives me a chance to be like, you know what, I'm going to schedule this time maybe to work on templates and designs and kind of get that out. Okay, now I can schedule to refocus more on seniors, or I have some people that I do some custom, composite work for and like that, so I can ramp that up as I need to. It's just a nice creative outlet to say I don't have to get stuck in the same rut all the time.
That is nice. And the designing of the templates, the additional residual income that you're creating, and the revenue stream that you have, led to you recognizing a need in the market, and you ultimately creating a tangible product that we all got to play with at Push. And we all had fun. And it was genius. It seemed so simple, but yet if you've ever shot sports, which I just left sports for the high school and middle school, I've done it for years, and I'm just doing add-ons in my studio now on my own. I don't want to deal with the coaches and all of that level of crazy. For me, it just is too much. Other people thrive in it. I did not. The product you created was so genius, because it's something, if you've ever photographed sports, you've encountered. Can you tell us a little bit about your product and why and where this came from for you just to create it?
Yeah, it was, to be honest, it came from I always say the best innovations come from lazy people. And I used to say this when I worked at the bank, because I was in a supervisory role for a position. I always said, I would rather have a really smart, really lazy person work for me, because they're going to find the most efficient way to get something done with the least amount of effort.
That is
And
so true.
I kind of feel that way about, because I kind of had that approach. Like, there were several innovations I got to do while working at the bank, because it was like, I want to get home on time. I don't want to be here any longer than I have to be. So it forces you to think about, how do I make this better? So fast forward to this approach, one of the things that I learned that I didn't like about team stuff is just the time involved. And I was already pretty quick. Like, I decided, I'm going to do limited poses, I'm going to get these 3 angles, because that gives me flexibility to create different arrangements in post when I'm putting teams together. And so I had gotten down to where I was about 30 to 40 seconds a kid. Like, that's pretty quick. That's moving them through pretty quick. And so contemplating, there's got to be, I'm still there too long. I felt like I could run 100 kids through and be done, in 30 minutes. And I'm like, it's still too long. It's got to be a way to make it faster. And so I was like, okay, the slowdown here is, and I did what a lot of people do. You mark an X on the floor, with especially with composite team stuff, everything needs to stay the same. They got to be standing in the same position. The lighting's got to be the same. Camera's got to be the same. So the slowdown was having that X on the floor and be like, okay, now I need you to turn a little bit to the left, now a little bit to the right. And then it was always this tweaking. All right, come back a little bit, go here, right. So I'm like, okay, here, the slowdown here is that I need to position them more quickly. How can I do that? And so at the same time, I had seen there was some stuff floating around in a couple of the team volume groups of people were printing paper and putting X's in different spots and trying different arrangements. And I thought, that could speed things up, but I I had issues with all that. One, I wanted something that they knew immediately, stand here. So I'm like, okay, if these are footprints, well, that should visually cue them, feet go where feet go. Then I thought, well, I want 3 different sets of footprints because I want these 3 angles, and it's going to put them exactly the same angle as the person before them and the person after them. And I needed to get them there quickly. So decided to try like color coding, right? So it started to develop into this product. Like, okay, there's this thing they're going to stand on. We're going to have green feet and red feet and blue feet. And so the idea is like, I could just say, okay, red, and they're there, blue, and they're there. And so it developed as a very selfish way for me to try and get done with my work more quickly. So I was like, okay, I know I could get paper of these printed, but now I have a consumable, and I hate consumables. I don't like to keep stock of stuff or have to like make sure I've got order on hand, or, it just makes me cringe for whatever reason. So I'm like, okay, let me start digging around. What would be ultimate here was, what if it's like a mat, like a floor mat? What if it's like heavy duty? Okay, I work with kids with cleats that come through this all the time. Like, this thing needs to hold up. I can't have the paint wearing off. They track mud all over my green screens and stuff like that. Like, glitter from the cheerleaders is everywhere. So I'm like, okay, this thing will be easy to clean. Like, I was just running through all this, and it actually prevented me for about a year. I actually didn't make this thing because I was so daunted by like, it needs to tick all these boxes before I'm willing to do it. So I actually started working with like doing a lot of internet searches. Okay, who can make this thing? Because I don't even know where to go about making a product. So I worked with like, oh gosh, 4 different providers, and none of them, either they couldn't get me the quality that I needed, or they couldn't get me like, well, let me back up a little bit. I worked with a couple places that actually got me what I wanted, kind of. The first was like a carpet type material. And so I'm like, okay, this is cool. Let me take it out and use it. The shoot was amazing. Like, the first time I put it down was like, instead of 30 to 40 seconds, kids, I was like 15 to 20, like literally just cut it in half. Like, everything, it worked just like I hoped. Red feet, blue feet, green feet, and just nailed it. And they were out. The problem I realized was, one shoot in, it was like a whitish carpet was just completely brown. It was so dirty. I'm like, I could never clean this thing. This needs to be rubber. I need to be able to spray it off. And then I was like, you know what? Like, this helped me a ton. It's got to help other people. It has to. And I know a lot of people were using the paper and stuff at this point and seeing a lot of advantage of like having this something there to help expedite their workflow. But I wanted to make something
shift, right? Couldn't the paper shift?
Well, yeah. So a lot of people were taping the paper down, which again, okay, that helps keep it from moving. But a couple sets of cleats on that, it's going to tear up. It's going to rip. Actually saw some people like putting paper down, taping, and then putting plexiglass over that so it doesn't tear up the paper, which is great until they come in with like wet feet or something slick on plexiglass. Like, I'm thinking, I'm trying to think through, I'm literally trying to think through what could make this everything it needs to be. And so like, it's got to be non-skid, non-slip, rubberized. And then I'm like, if I'm going to offer this to other people, the big problem it was a very expensive product to have made. So that was my biggest hang. Like, I used it for myself before a while before ever offering it to anybody, because I'm like, it's just too expensive. Like, I didn't want to, offer these things at $200. Honestly, I didn't want to. Like, I wanted them to be cheaper. But the issue is just, that's not a profit center for me, to be 100% honest. This whole thing, we ended up dubbing it the magic mat because it literally just was like magic to my workflow, cutting it in half. Has been a labor of love more than anything. Because it helped me so much in just not only normalizing all those positions of all the kids in the composite, but just speeding up workflow. Is like, other people, they have to get as much out of this as I do. They have to. And how can I not offer it to them? And so I'm like, what's the cheapest I could do this, where I can afford to put in the work of getting them made, any kind of like bulk orders, getting them in, shipping them out. And I'm like, you know what? It may be a little bit what some people will think is a little expensive. We know how photography goes. Some people don't want to pay more than $20 or something. I get that. But I thought, you know what, if I would drop $200 on this any day, because of how it's changed everything that I do.
Well, and time is money. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
photographers or creatives in general do not realize that your time is a cash commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And you literally cut your time in half by having this. So that freed you up to do even more volume.
Right.
So that's
Yeah, and it
money that you made.
right.
$200 is a very tiny.
The more throughput you can get, the faster you can do it. You're saying, that's money. That's money in the bank.
It is. I mean, $200 is a very small investment to be making way more than $200.
Right.
And
But, you know,
it's
it's one of, again, everything is a learning experience. Like, one of the things I had to learn to do was being able to sell a product, even with the templates. Because I come from this mental background where I want to do everything myself. And that's a good place to be in a lot of ways. But the negative side of that is when you feel like you need to do everything yourself, it makes you very cheap. Because now and I was the same way. I was unwilling to spend money on something someone else did because I can do it myself. Does that make sense?
absolutely. And we all fall into that trap.
Yeah. And so the problem with selling now to somebody else is having that mindset. Like, I'm asking somebody to pay for this when I, initially wouldn't have paid for it myself. That was a real learning curve. One of the things that selling to other people over the years has taught me is how to buy from other people when it makes it more efficient for me to then in turn make more money. So I'm convinced that if I get to do this for the next 50 years, I will never stop learning things that make life and business and everything more efficient or better, or how to do it right versus what I did a year ago, because I'm constantly learning all these crazy things.
Well, and that's genius. And thank goodness you're going to keep innovating and sharing with everyone for the next 50 years, because we're going to need it. But what would you say to the photographer that sees these amazing composites? Like, Nikki uses a lot of your products, and other photographers as well. What would you say to that photographer who wants to get started? I mean, just how difficult is it for them to create with your templates?
So in the grand scheme of things, it's not difficult. What I would say is everything has a learning curve, but the beauty is, between the Facebook groups, between YouTube, between conferences we can go to, like, we can learn how to do stuff well really easily now. Like, I come from a time where YouTube did not have content for photographers. So there was no like going and watching a video on how to do this lighting setup or something like that. So it's very easy to learn. And there's a lot of groups where people are very open to share. So for instance, if you want to get into composite teams, consistency is key. Like we talked about a second ago, everything needs to remain the same. Once you learn kind of your lighting setup, position where things go, and make sure stuff doesn't move, like, you really simplify that whole process. It becomes very easy. And then where the spot I tried to fill in the industry with the templates was there was things of it, like, there were other things available that maybe required a little more setup or thought behind them. And I said, okay, I want to make something where people can literally take what they have and just drop it in, without having to do a lot of post-processing. And so I tried to design them. When I was getting into this, my thought was, if I can design this in such a way that maybe there's some color grading, or there's some special effects, or they're like things built in so that they're literally just dropping your subjects in and all this stuff just gets applied, and trying to make it work for high, fast volume teams. Mm-hmm. I've got a league of 30 kids and maybe 50 teams, and I want them to be able to take a design and just drop all their teams in and go. Like, I want it to be fast. So ultimately, to answer your question, it's not difficult as long as all your basics are there. You know, the lighting, the camera angle, nothing changing, everything consistent. If it's all consistent, and with photography, if it's lit well, you're good to go. There's a spot marked in there, drop it in, arrange it, you're done. Like, you're good. So I try and make it as simple as I can think to.
That's really awesome and helpful. We're going to wrap this up here, but I'm just really curious. What are 3 things that are coming from you in 2022 that we can be excited about?
3 things. Oh, well, I definitely have some new template ideas. My son has actually been working directly for me and doing more 3D assets. So I'm wanting to incorporate more of that. I have some ideas to actually improve the magic mats for other users who currently don't use them for other reasons. If I can, I've been talking to providers. The trick is finding somebody who can produce the product. If I can find that, I'm hoping to have a whole new level of that available. And then the third, just with my own work, I've kind of set personal goals for my own work, my photography. And so over the past year or 2, I've really been pushing more of a cinematic style with my seniors, and I want to explore that even more. So that's kind of my plan for the upcoming year.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's just making me think maybe I've been off more than.
You're going to be hitting the ground running coming January 1st, aren't you?
I'm going to have to, or none of it's going to happen.
Where can people find you, Josh?
So my photography page, joshuahannaphotography.com. Templates is jhphotodesign.com. Facebook, just look me up, Josh Hanna. I chat with people on there. I do use Messenger quite often. So yeah, I love just talking photography and business and all of that.
Well, we look to seeing more of you around Senior Style Guide and introducing everyone to your work. When this drops, I'd like for you to post a few images below.
Okay.
Comments for people so that they can get familiar with you. And some of your products are on your actual photography page, which makes it really easy to find you. Anything you want to add that I've missed?
No, I'm just excited. We've talked about, I've followed Senior Style Guide kind of in peripheral for a while. I was very aware of it because of Nikki and all of her involvement and things like that. So I was like, you know what, it seems like a cool group, and talking to people part of the group who all have nothing but great things to say. Like, yeah, I like to be involved. Well, I've always said it this way. I always admire people in the industry who the people that I admire. Does that make sense? So when you hear about a group where nothing but good things are being said about the group and the people that are in it and run it, I'm like, that's the kind of people I want to be with.
Well, that's the kind of group we want to be, and we strive to be that way. We just want to be friendly. I mean, we all graduated high school. We don't need to go back, do we?
Right.
I mean, we were in the trenches once. I'm not going back in those trenches. So
No doubt.
Well, thank you, Josh, for taking time today. And like I said, we look forward to seeing more of you. And I'm telling you guys, that magic mat is game changer, because from someone who did school sports for 9 years, I was like, whoa, when she whipped that out at Push. There's a photo floating around somewhere of me jumping on it or something I've seen a few times. So definitely go follow Josh and hit us up in the comments with all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.